Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. This time around, we're taking a look at Russia's latest efforts to maintain influence in Central Asia, a region Vladimir Putin seems to treat like a board game, except instead of monopoly, it's more like dictatorship diplomacy. Putin has traveled to Kazakhstan, holding talks with President Tokayev to remind everyone who's the regional boss. Spoiler alert, it's not going as smoothly as the Kremlin might hope. In recent years, Kazakhstan and its neighbors have been trying to keep Russia close, but not too close, while diversifying partnerships with China, Turkey, and even the West. Basically, Central Asia is trying to tell Russia, we're just not that into you anymore. So, what's the Kremlin's playbook for reeling Kazakhstan back in? Well, for that, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Vladimir Putin receives a warm welcome in Astana, though the weather is anything but, as has been the relationship between Russia and Kazakhstan over the last couple of years. In September, Kazakhstan refused to join BRICS, and Russia banned certain agricultural exports from the country. This glamorous state visit coincides with the CSTO security summit. Often dubbed Russia's version of NATO, the organization hasn't been doing too hot as of late. Armenia suspended its activities as part of it, and the war in Ukraine has undermined Moscow's credibility. Despite all these problems, the CSTO's leaders are at least putting up a positive front.
Some issues require, as you said, attention from our side, from the Russian side, and you expect certain decisions from the Russian side.
Putin's words here can be interpreted in many ways. Astana, despite trying to distance itself after the war in Ukraine, is heavily reliant on imports of food and other products from Russia. Meanwhile, up to 80% of Kazakhstan's oil is exported to Western markets via Russia, making the relationship pretty complicated for Kazakh President Tokayev. Though that isn't to say that he hasn't been making some inroads elsewhere. His country has been developing its ties and trade relationship with Beijing, for example. And China, being the savvy trade empire it has been for thousands of years, is more than eager to pull some of Russia's close friends into its own embrace.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Alright, let's break the story down into some main themes. First up, trade. Russia is Kazakhstan's largest trading partner, and Putin wants to tighten that grip. So during his recent visit, the two leaders discussed increasing oil and gas cooperation, food exports, and logistical ties. Sounds innocent enough, right? Well, not so fast. For Putin, every pipeline, every wheat shipment, and every new railway is a tool for maintaining political leverage. It's more than economics, it's power. Take oil, for instance. Kazakhstan is a major producer, and much of its crude gets exported through Russian pipelines. Now, this gives Putin a major card to play. If Kazakhstan steps out of line, say by criticizing Moscow's action in Ukraine or getting too cozy with the West, Russia could simply accidentally disrupt these energy flows. And let's not forget agriculture. Kazakhstan's grain exports are crucial for regional food security, and Moscow would love to turn that into another leverage of influence. But there's a catch. Kazakhstan isn't exactly playing along. Tokayev has been walking a diplomatic tightrope, carefully distancing his country from Moscow's most controversial moves. Kazakhstan hasn't recognized Russia's annexation of Ukrainian territories, and Tokayev has even gone so far as to suggest his country could leave the Euro-Asian Economic Union if Moscow pushes too hard. And then there's China. Beijing has been making major inroads in Central Asia, investing heavily in infrastructure and trade. Now, this puts Kazakhstan in a unique position, playing Russia and China against each other. Kazakhstan even hosted a China-Central Asia summit earlier this year, which Putin wasn't invited to. Ouch. But let's not give Tokayev too much credit here. He's no angel. Kazakhstan's government is tightly controlled, corruption is rampant, and democratic reforms are basically a distant dream. Yet, compared to Putin's Russia, Tokayev does look like a beacon of moderation. This makes Kazakhstan an attractive partner for countries like the United States and the European Union, who are eager to counterbalance Russian and Chinese influence in the region. Putin's war in Ukraine has drained Russia's resources and tarnished its reputation, even among traditional allies. Meanwhile, sanctions have forced Moscow to rely more heavily on countries like Kazakhstan for trade, making the Kremlin look more like a beggar than a boss. In the end, Putin's visit to Kazakhstan was a reminder that Russia's influence in the region is being challenged like never before. Putin knows he can't afford to lose Kazakhstan, but Tokayev also knows that he has options and he's not afraid to use them. As the region continues to evolve, one thing is clear: Central Asia is no longer content to live in Russia's shadow. And now, here to share more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, board member of Caspian Policy Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Easter Express.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So today we are looking at the relation between Russia and, Kazakhstan. And I'm wondering, with this CSTO meeting taking place with Putin leading the charge, how concerned should the West be?
Well, at this point, probably not. The CSTO is having a huge amount of problems at the moment. I mean, let's start with the fact that the Armenian prime minister didn't even show up, which is not a surprise. He hasn't shown up to any of these CSTO meetings lately. The CSTO is having a difficult time, specifically because of what Russia's done in Ukraine. There is part of the charter that says that they're supposed to come to the aid of a country that's been invaded by an external power. And technically speaking, since Ukrainian troops are in the Kursk Oblast in Russia, Russia could call them in. That obviously that hasn't happened. I mean, it's been months now since the Ukrainian troops moved into Kursk. But I mean, this is in the back of the mind of all the CSTO leaders: is what exactly does Russia want them to expect that they might be able to do to help them out? Given that if we're going to go by the letter of the charter, they are supposed to be there if Russia calls for their help, and of course, none of them want to do this. So. Now that said, of course, we remember that in January 2022, Kazakhstan had huge unrest in the country, and they did call for CSTO help to put down the unrest, and Russia led the charge in that and did send troops for not even 2 weeks, but enough that Kazakhstan, the Kazakh authorities were able to concentrate their internal forces, the Interior Ministry and their security network forces, to quell the unrest in the country. So in some ways they are indebted to Russia, but like I said, this is a debt that they really don't want to have to pay back at this moment, especially considering that Russia is an international pariah.
So do you think that when we look at an organization like CSTO, which is supposed to be like their equivalent of NATO, if Article 5 never kicks into place, does the organization still hold?
Well, it is holding together. Of course, they're great at semantics. Let's not forget that there was a conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, actually two, one in 2021 and one in 22. And both those countries are members of the CSTO, and the CSTO didn't do anything at all. In fact, during the first one, there was a meeting of the security, I think the secretaries of the Security Council of the CSTO member states in Dushanbe in the Tajik capital, and they avoided the issue entirely. So the CSTO is really good at trying to explain why this is not a scenario that they can intervene in. We've had 3 revolutions in Kyrgyzstan, and interethnic unrest in June 2010, and in all those cases, the CSTO was able to say this is an internal threat. It doesn't really meet the terms of the charter, so we're not obligated to come and intervene in this. So there's a lot of questions, about what CSTO membership means. Actually, I mentioned the Armenian prime minister is not there, obviously because his country was attacked, or at least they're going to say they were attacked by Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is not a member of the CSTO, so technically this qualifies as an external power attacking a member state of the CSTO, and yet Russia did nothing about it, neither did any of the other members. So like I said, it seems like the CSTO is probably better at keeping regimes in power than actually protecting them against an external threat. And if you look at the comments from the Kazakh president today, what he said was the CSTO is valuable for dealing with international threats, and he named terrorism, drug trafficking, international criminal groups, but he didn't say anything about external threats, meaning like an actual foreign state attacking another CSTO member.
And that's very interesting because when we look at it, we try to kind of understand it in the context of what NATO is, but perhaps it still has a little bit of functionality that is fundamentally different. Now, when it comes to Russia and trying to maintain their influence in Central Asia, do you also see that somehow waning, seeing a lot more and more countries are trying to look for other opportunities?
Yeah, this is a big part of why Putin is there. Absolutely. I mean, he's not. There is a CSTO summit today, but yesterday he started an official visit to Kazakhstan also. So he's getting a 2-for-1, so to speak, in this, and making a statement by showing up in Kazakhstan for a one-on-one meeting with the Kazakh president. And I should mention, by the way, that he was very warmly greeted. They had a big banner at the airport that said, "Welcome, Your Excellency." I mean, that was literally the term they used, Your Excellency. So. Not to mention a flyby by Kazakh planes that left, put out smoke that was in the symbol of the Russian flag. But Putin has made a lot of visits to Central Asia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russia has a dwindling number of friends at the moment, but Central Asia is still a place where he's welcome. It's important for the Russian government to show that they're not isolated, that Putin's not isolated, that he can still make foreign visits and be warmly welcomed in countries. Since there aren't that many of them, Central Asia has become much more important. Putin has made so many more visits to Central Asia in the last nearly 3 years than he probably did in the previous 10 years combined. So it shows that there's a new focus on Central Asia. There are some ways in which Russia is able to exert some influence in Central Asia, or at least extend it. One is gas sales, for instance. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan used to be gas exporting countries. In fact, they exported gas to Russia. Unfortunately, for both those Central Asian countries, they've run into shortages in the last few years, and they've stopped exporting gas, and now they're actually rerouted that for domestic use. But even that isn't enough. So they've had to import gas, and Russia is the one that stepped in and said, we're willing to export gas to your countries. In the case of Uzbekistan, they have a contract to export up to 11 billion cubic meters of gas, which is roughly 20% of the amount of gas that Uzbekistan uses domestically. So they've been able to shore up some of the influence that they have been losing. Now I should mention, of course, and as you alluded to, that a lot of countries have jumped in here and are trying to get better ties with the Central Asia. So there's a much more fierce competition going on for influence in Central Asia and partnerships in Central Asia than was previously the case prior to February 2022. So Russia certainly understands its position is weakened in the country, or in the region, I should say, and they're making efforts to try to make sure that they keep the influence in the country. If I could just add one more thing, though. All the Central Asian countries are closely tied to the Russian ruble. Russia is a leading trade partner of all the Central Asian countries. Now, we've seen the dramatic fall of the Russian ruble in recent days. Today in Kazakhstan, the rate of the Kazakh tenge to the dollar was up about 515 tenge to a dollar. And let me put that in perspective. I was in Kazakhstan last year. It was 450 to the dollar. So the reason the rate has gone up so much is directly related to the weakening of the Russian ruble. So this is another thing that the Central Asian governments have to keep in mind too. Russia is a valuable partner. It's an important partner. It still has a lot of levers that it can pull to keep the Central Asian states close to Moscow. But at the same time, the exchange rates going up in the Central Asian countries directly because of the weakening of the Russian ruble is a reminder to all the Central Asian countries that this partner is problematic at times.
Right, like you mentioned earlier, with the dwindling allies that Russia now has, one of the reasons for these increased number of visits is to show that Putin's not internationally isolated. But what are some of the more practical sense in trying to rope in some of these Central Asian countries?
Well, of course, there is a long-standing partnership. Partnership might not be the word some Central Asians would use. The fact was, this was the old colonial master. So, you do have this situation where it's kind of the devil they know, I suppose. Up to anywhere from 5 to 8 million Central Asian citizens have been migrant laborers in Russia during various years for the last 15 years. It's a source of income for a lot of people. It's an important source of income for countries like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and to a lesser extent Uzbekistan, although it's still important. So there still are millions of Central Asians, less every day now, but there still are millions of Central Asians that are working in Russia and sending remittances back to their homelands. And those remittances are very important. In some cases, this is 30, 40% of the economy is based on remittances that are being sent home to Russia. So this is one of the ways that Russia is still extremely important to Central Asia. Security, absolutely. At the end of the day, Russia is the ultimate guarantor of security. If the Central Asians faced a serious external threat, they could count, or at least they believe that they can count on Russia to come and help them out. This is very important for the poorer countries in the region, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where Russia has military bases, for example. I mean, those governments are counting on the fact that if their situation is destabilized and it looks like the government might be chased for power, that they're going to be able to call the Kremlin and get some kind of help, military assistance that will keep them in power and hopefully secure stability in the country again.
All right, you mentioned earlier the Russian economy doesn't seem to be doing so hot right now, and the Central Asian countries are aware of that. Do you think that would create some space for the Chinese to move in and gain a foothold when it comes to their influence?
Well, certainly. I mean, actually, that's been kind of true for a long time. I mean, the old saying was that Russia was the policeman of Central Asia and China was the banker. In the first year and a half after February 2022, China kind of kept a very low profile. I think they didn't want to provoke the Kremlin. So they didn't make any real big moves in Central Asia. China is the other big trade and investment partner in Central Asia, right up there with Russia, and in some cases more so than Russia. But in the last year, I would say, it's been noticeable that China has started to engage in a lot more projects in Central Asia. There's a lot of deals that they've been signing for power plants, different infrastructure projects that they hadn't been interested in before, but all of a sudden seem to be very interested in signing these agreements with practically all the countries in Central Asia now. So they're really pushing up their profile in Central Asia, and I think it's inescapable. One gets the feeling that when the conflict in Ukraine is over, that China will be the dominant, undisputably, the dominant power, foreign power in Central Asia as far as influence goes.
All right. Thank you so much for all your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for the invitation.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. The Biden administration is reportedly urging Ukraine to lower its draft age from 25 to 18 years old. U.S. officials believe that this adjustment could address Ukraine's ongoing manpower challenges on the front lines.
Over the course of the war, Ukraine has been mobilizing and training thousands of soldiers. It seems, however, that even these efforts will not be enough to guarantee victory. Many believe that the war in Ukraine is entering another crucial phase, perhaps even the most crucial one. Some senior Ukrainian officials say that the country's army requires 500,000 new troops to solve its manpower problems and to continue operations. The Biden administration says it knows the answer to that problem, according to an anonymous source cited by the Associated Press. Mobilizing Ukraine's hitherto largely unaffected under-25s. This has apparently been described as simple mathematics. Zelensky had so far been hesitant to draft them outright. Instead, in November, Kyiv said it would offer contract opportunities and mobilization packages to those below the current draft age.
President-elect Donald Trump has announced that Keith Kellogg, his top defense advisor, will serve as his special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. Kellogg has previously proposed a plan to end the ongoing conflict.
Donald Trump continues his nomination marathon. This time he has chosen the person who will handle his vision for the war in Ukraine. Kellogg has already said his idea would be to freeze the lines of battle where they are and force both sides to the negotiating table. Ukrainian authorities, including the president, have already signaled that they are aware that the war could be ended next year through diplomatic means. Reuters has reported that in Kellogg's view, the Ukrainians should be told that if they don't come to the table, US aid will dry up. On the other hand, he also advocates telling the Russians that if they don't play nice and sit at the same table, the US will give Kyiv everything it could possibly need. The Kremlin itself has been open to Trump's peace plan for the war, although it isn't keen on any concessions. The details of Trump's personal plan for the war still mostly remain a mystery.
In Romania, far-right presidential candidate Calin Georgescu is backtracking on earlier statements. He now denies advocating for Romania's withdrawal from NATO and the European Union, signaling a more moderated stance.
This man has just scored a shocking victory in the first round of Romanian presidential elections. He is now heading for a runoff against a strong Euro-Atlantist, Alina Lasconi. Georgescu's entire campaign was very unusual for Romania, as he doesn't have the backing of a party and instead focused mostly on social media and podcasts. Both NATO and the EU are very well liked in the country, so his words about the world's weakest alliance and listening to Russian wisdom came as quite a surprise. Many people, given the recent protests, disagree with these notions. And yet he earned 23% of the vote and won the first round of the elections. Despite criticizing key NATO investments like the military base in Develesu, which he called a shame. He now says he doesn't want for Romania to leave either organization, but that he also doesn't want his country to just, to quote, accept everything kneeling.
The ruling Georgian Dream Party remains undeterred by criticisms as it moves forward with its plans. The party has nominated Mikhail Kavelashvili, a Eurosceptic and former soccer player, for the contentious upcoming presidential elections.
By nominating this man, the Georgian Dream shows that it is heading for a confrontation with the opposition and the incumbent president. The party's candidate is one of the leaders of an anti-Western offshoot of the Georgian Dream, the People's Power. Despite an opposition boycott and Western criticism over the election's validity, the party's MPs still held the opening session of parliament. Thousands of Georgians also share this view of the recent vote and have taken to the streets. With each passing protest, however, tensions are running higher and higher, with some worrying that they might reach a boiling point. Barely a generation has passed since Georgia gained its freedom from the collapsing Soviet Union. With these displays of opposition, many Georgians are saying that they do not want anything to do with Moscow ever again.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.